It was 5 a.m. on the morning of May 22nd, 1946. A one-eyed man stood on a wooden gallows in the courtyard of Prague's Pankrác Prison, dressed in a plain suit, hands bound behind his back, staring out at a crowd of more than 5,000 people who had come to watch him die. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't weeping. He wasn't begging. He scanned the crowd with that single cold eye, the same eye that had looked over burning villages without flinching, the same eye that had reviewed execution lists over morning coffee. And he delivered his final words without shame. Germany must live even if we die. Long live the German nation. Long live the German spirit. In the front row, 7 women from a village called Lidice sat in silence. They had lost their husbands. They had lost their children. When they had survived concentration camps to be here, in this exact moment, to watch this exact man drop. One of those women, Marie Supikova, had been just 9 years old when German soldiers stormed her home in the night. She remembered crying. We cried and cried because we were very scared, upset and confused. We didn't know what was happening. She spent years forgetting her native Czech language, forced to live as a German girl named Ingeborg Schiller. The man responsible for all of it was now standing on a rope. His name was Karl Hermann Frank. And this is the full story. If you're watching this for the first time, welcome to WW2 Time Tales. We dig into the real history of World War II, the raw facts, the real people, the stories nobody tells you in school. Okay, subscribe right now and hit the bell, because this channel is about to become your favorite history obsession. Now let's get into it. Karl Hermann Frank entered the world on January 24, 1898, in the resort city of Carlsbad, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, today known as Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic. His father Heinrich was an elementary school teacher, but more importantly, he was an obsessive German nationalist. He raised Karl in a household soaked in ethnic resentment, teaching him that Germans were superior and that living among Czechs and Slavs was an insult to be corrected. Then around age 9 or 10, Karl's life changed in a single moment. He was playing outside when another child threw a rock that struck him directly in the right eye. Doctors operated for years. Nothing worked. In 1918, the eye was surgically removed and replaced with a glass one. It is one of history's small, dark ironies. The man who would spend his life looking down on others spent that life half blind. When World War I broke out in 1914, 16-year-old Karl tried desperately to enlist in the Austro-Hungarian army. He was rejected because of the glass eye. The war ended without him. His country collapsed. Czechoslovakia was born, and Karl Hermann Frank, a German in a Slavic nation, rejected by his own army, raised on nationalist rage, was left with nothing but hatred and ambition. The bookstore Nazi. In 1919, Frank joined the German National Socialist Workers' Party, a proto-Nazi organization inside Czechoslovakia dedicated to ethnic German supremacy. He was 21 years old. 6 years later, in 1925, he married Anna Müller, a tailor's daughter from Carlsbad, and opened a bookstore in the city. The shop was real, but it wasn't really about books. It was a front for National Socialist literature and recruitment, a reading room for radicals. His marriage, however, was falling apart. Frank later admitted in court, with remarkable coldness, "It was an unfortunate marriage. I have not lived with my wife since 1933 because I was so busy in political life that I did not care for her. In the court ruling, the marriage was ended by my fault. They divorced in February 1940. 2 months later, just weeks after he helped orchestrate the Nazi occupation of an entire country. Frank married Dr. Karola Blaszek, a physician 13 years younger than him, on April 14, 1940. He moved her into a luxurious villa in the Prague neighborhood of Bubenec, a mansion seized from its previous owners. Together, they had 3 children, daughter Edda, born in 1941, son Wolf Dietrich in 1942, and daughter Hala Sigrid in 1944. While Frank was playing the role of devoted family man in his stolen Prague villa, he was simultaneously signing death warrants for Czech families outside the window. By 1938, Frank was deputy leader of the Sudeten German Party, the largest single party in all of Czechoslovakia, with over 1.3 million members. It had become a Nazi fifth column operating in plain sight, financed by Berlin, with the explicit goal of dismembering the country. When Hitler threatened war over the Sudetenland, Britain and France flew to Munich. On September 29th to 30th, 1938, they signed away Czechoslovak territory without a single Czech official in the room. The Czechoslovaks called it the Great Betrayal. Frank called it a victory. He was rewarded with the position of Deputy Gauleiter of the Sudetenland and joined the SS and Nazi Party on November 1st, 1938. Less than 6 months later, on March 15, 1939, Nazi tanks rolled into the rest of Czechoslovakia. Hitler stood at Prague Castle and declared victory. Frank was appointed Secretary of State of the new Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and, more critically, its higher SS and police leader. He now commanded the Gestapo, the SD, and the criminal police. He was 31 years old and held the power of life and death over millions of people. Bloody Dog Frank. The Czechs didn't stay silent. They organized boycotts, sang forbidden national anthems, and spray-painted resistance slogans. When student Jan Opletal was shot dead during an Independence Day protest in October 1939, his funeral drew 3,000 mourners who began chanting anti-German slogans. When Frank's own car driver was beaten in the crowd, Frank took it personally. On the night of November 16, 1939, Gestapo agents raided student dormitories across Prague and Brno. Over 1,200 students were ripped from their beds, loaded onto trucks, and transported to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. At dawn, 9 alleged student leaders were executed by firing squad, without trial, without charges. Every university in the Protectorate was shut down for the rest of the war, silencing 15,000 students and 1,300 professors in a single stroke. The Czech people baptized Karl Hermann Frank with a nickname that would outlast his life, Bloody Dog Frank. In September 1941, Hitler replaced the relatively moderate Reich Protector Neurath with Reinhard Heydrich, the man who would later chair the Wannsee Conference and become known as the primary architect of the Holocaust. Heydrich arrived in Prague and announced to his staff, "We will Germanize the Czech vermin." He and Frank, two ruthless, ambitious killers, formed a terrifyingly efficient partnership. Within months, between 4,000 and 5,000 people had been arrested and up to 500 executed. Jewish deportations accelerated in lockstep. By November 3, 1941, 5,000 Jews had already been shipped to the Łódź ghetto in occupied Poland. Of those 5,000, only 277 would survive the war. The Heydrich also established the Theresienstadt ghetto in the fortress town of Terezín, a fake model Jewish community built to deceive Red Cross inspectors, while in reality serving as a transit point to Auschwitz. Frank and Heydrich were building a killing machine, and it was running at full speed. On May 27, 1942, 2 Czechoslovak paratroopers, Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš, ambushed Heydrich's open-top Mercedes at a hairpin turn in Prague's Holešovice district. A grenade exploded under the car. Heydrich, mortally wounded by shrapnel and horsehair from the car seat embedded in his bloodstream, died 8 days later. Frank's response was immediate and savage. He declared martial law, imposed a curfew, and launched a manhunt with 21,000 officers searching 36,000 homes. Within days, the 157 people were already executed in retaliation, and the assassins were still at large. Then Frank chose a village that had nothing to do with any of it. On the night of June 9, 1942, SS troops surrounded Lidice, a quiet farming village of 503 people about 15 miles from Prague. What happened next lasted less than 24 hours, but its horror echoes to this day. By afternoon of June 10th, Nazi soldiers had executed 173 men and boys, brought out in groups of 10, lined up against a barn padded with mattresses to stop bullets from ricocheting. One man who witnessed it later recalled that the local priest, Father Josef Stembarka, was offered mercy if he would calm the villagers. He refused. "I have lived with my flock," he said, "and now I will die with it." He was shot with the rest of them. All 184 women were transported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Of the 88 children, a small group with blonde hair and blue eyes were taken by SS families and given German names. 9-year-old Marie Supikova became Ingeborg Schiller. She forgot her own language. She forgot her own name. The remaining 82 children, deemed unfit for Germanization, were loaded into sealed lorries converted into mobile gas chambers and murdered with carbon monoxide at the Chełmno extermination camp. 4 pregnant women were forced to undergo abortions in the same hospital where Heydrich had just died. Frank was seen personally visiting the ruins of Lidice to inspect the destruction. By all accounts, he was satisfied. The village was burned to ash, the rubble bulldozed, and crops planted over the earth, as if 503 human beings had never existed. Not news of Lidice shocked the world. In the United States, Britain, and across the Allied nations, the name Lidice became a rallying cry, a symbol burned into the conscience of every nation fighting Hitler. By 1944, the Third Reich was bleeding from every front. Frank personally commanded anti-partisan operations in Moravia, ordering the public hanging of executed suspects for 48 hours as a psychological weapon. It didn't work. Czech partisans kept fighting. On May 1, 1945, with Nazi Germany days from total collapse, Frank went on Czech radio and threatened to drown any uprising in a sea of blood. 8 days later, his phone rang. American troops had crossed into western Bohemia. Frank fled Prague. He had no intention of facing Soviet justice. He surrendered to the U.S. Army near Rokycany on May 9, 1945. When he thought American hands would be gentler, he was wrong. He was extradited back to Prague in chains. At his 1946 trial before the People's Court of Prague, Frank argued he had simply followed orders, that he was a small cog in a large Nazi machine. Then prosecutors unveiled his personal archive, recovered from a hidden mine near the village of Stešovice. Hundreds of documents with Frank's own signature, authorizing arrests, executions, and mass deportations. Every defense collapsed. On May 21, 1946, the court sentenced him to death. Even then, Frank couldn't accept it. The man who had never once offered mercy to a single Czech wrote a desperate telegram to President Edvard Beneš, begging for his life. "I believe that as a victor you will show mercy and grant me life." Beneš never replied. May 22, 1946, 5 a.m., Pankrác Prison. Had more than 5,000 people filled the courtyard, citizens, journalists, and survivors. In the front row sat the 7 women of Lidice who had survived Ravensbrück. They watched in silence as the man who had ordered their world destroyed was walked to the gallows. The pole-hanging method was used, slower, more agonizing than a standard drop. Karl Hermann Frank died in front of the people he had tried to erase. His wife Carola was arrested by Soviet forces, sentenced, and spent a decade performing forced labor in Kazakhstan's Gulag system. She was released in 1955 and eventually made it to West Germany, where she found her 3 children, now teenagers living under new names and new families, strangers to their own mother, and Frank's first son Harold, the eldest boy raised on his father's nationalism. He had served as an SS Panzer Grenadier in the 1st SS Division Leibstandard Adolf Hitler, Hitler's personal bodyguard division. The poison ran all the way down. Karl Hermann Frank was not a monster born in a vacuum. He was a product of hatred taught at a kitchen table, radicalized in a bookstore, and handed the power of a state. He used that power to erase a village, deport thousands to gas chambers, and execute students for singing their national anthem. And in the end, the people he tried to silence were the ones who watched him die. If this story hit you, and it should, smash that like button and share this video. Every share keeps the memory of Lidice alive. Every view tells the survivors we still remember. Subscribe to WW2 Tales for more real, unfiltered, deeply researched stories of the Second World War. Drop a comment below and tell us, do you think 5,000 people watching him hang was enough justice for what he did? We read every single comment. See you in the next one.